These guys got me. I'm down on my knees with the gun in my mouth, the first gun, tears coming down my face, and only thing I can say is Isaiah 54:17, that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Like I couldn't say it with my mouth, but in my head, that's what I was saying. And I think the biggest mistake these guys had made and the devil made is that God had already proven himself.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of TKOF, Totally Killing Off Fear. My name is Taijun Waters, the creative founder and director of ABBA and Me. Make sure you check out abbaandme.com. We have our fashion there. In this episode, we're going to be talking to a man who has been silenced in his life, or at least there's been some attempts to try to silence him. We live in a world that is both physical and spiritual, and so whether this silencing is from actual people or from the spirits behind these people. One of the ways that we see Jesus redeeming his story is regardless of what the enemy has tried to do for his own purpose, God somehow turns around those horrible moments in ways that push him closer into purpose. Terrance.
I'm my mom's only child, right? And I have 76 first cousins on my mom's side. And so it wasn't strange to, gang bangers, drug dealers, and then there was me, right? And so the journey of trying, how do you develop into a man having been sexually violated? So your first sexual experience is that with a man who took advantage of you, right? Mm-hmm. And still try to develop culturally to the man that everybody says you have to be. And then secondly, spiritually to the man that God says you have to be, right? And so the story for me, I think that people kind of scratch their head with is like, man, how did you go through that, grow up here, live through this, and yet this is you today? The first story ever written about Terrance Waters was my sexual violation. But if you Google Terrance Waters right now, you see God's glory of him completely transforming my life, healing me to the point where now when you read, you see the evidence of what happened. Sorry, the transformational experience of what happened, and now God getting the glory out of that. Because I thought about suicide. I did. I thought about suicide. How could I end my life in the most painful way and be successful at it? You know? But God didn't let it be. My cousin, I'll never forget this story. I was 16 years old. My cousin who lived with us came home. He was 19. We were very close. It was like my only person I would consider my brother. He came home from work, he came, looked in my room, did the, oh, what's up? Went in his room, closed the door. I closed my door because I was on the phone, of course, with a young lady. And so I couldn't sort of disengage that to talk to him. But he went in his room, closed the door, and then later after I got off the phone, I wanted to play Nintendo, like we in a Nintendo. Right. So I'm gonna go to get my Nintendo. Let's go play the game. Knock on his door is locked. Look out the back, see if he's out playing basketball. He's not out there. Pop the door open with a hanger. Look in the room. He's there. He's breathing. But then I get closer. I see blood. He had taken a gun and shot himself through the mouth in the head. It was completely the most traumatizing experience. I thought the sexual violation was bad. Yeah. But seeing someone you love, that's like a brother who was successful at doing what you had thought about doing, devastating experience. And so I was angry. Like it's like I went to a whole nother level of angry. Now this is not decades apart. This is within the same, time frame as me being hurt in my opinion, by people that I trusted in the church, or my mom trusted in the church. And now this. But through the whole process, God was always present. Like it's like he kept me. I'm gonna try and do this in this conversation without getting emotional.
It's all right. You get emotional.
He kept me through the whole process. And I turned to God and I said, why did you allow me to find his body? Why? Like, why did I have to be the one? Like, there's other people who lived in this house. Why did I have to find his body? And the Lord said to me, I had to allow you to see what it felt like if you were to take your life, and that I had a greater purpose for your life. So I couldn't allow you to go down this path. Not to say he didn't have a purpose for my cousin's life, because my cousin had his greater purpose for me in that. And I know people say, well, you commit suicide, you're going to hell. Like, it's automatic. Like, that's what people would say. But I feel like my cousin served a purpose. He served the purpose, because if I didn't have that example, like, so much in my face, I wouldn't be here right now. Okay. So through his death, him being dead and me finding his body shifted my entire mindset around the purpose of my life and what God has for me. Right. He helped me lean more into God, to figure out, why did I exist? Because I felt like I was going through so much as a young person that I did not understand, like, God, you can't be real. Like, no young person should ever go through these things. Yeah. I had friends who were getting gunned down. I had other friends who had committed suicide. So it was like this whole thing around Russian roulette. It's like they would spin the thing and then they try to, like, they had this fascination with guns and stuff like that. And so it's either they were getting killed because of the violence on the street. So I didn't actually think or believe that I would see 21. Like, I thought that I would not be alive long enough to see that. And then when I got to 21, I said, oh, I won't see 25. And so this is really crazy, because after traveling around the world and being in other communities, people don't think like that. It's like foreign to them to think, oh yeah, they think they're gonna live until they're old and have grandkids and so forth. Right. Well, when you grew up in the hood, that's a total different experience for you, and it's like you're wondering if I'm going to be alive, right, at that time. But when I found my cousin's body, it changed me. It changed me in so many ways. And I think that's when my relationship with God probably launched to an entire different level. Because I wanted to know God in a way that my pastor couldn't preach about, my mom couldn't tell me to pray about. I wanted to know him intimately on my own. And so I pursued that. So I would go in my room, close the door, put a sign on my door, please do not disturb me, I'm in prayer, for hours. Like, turn all the lights off, turn the radio off, I just wanted to hear from God myself. At that time, I played football and ran track. And so I became very insecure around my sexuality, because I thought that I had done something to deserve what had been done to me, right? Right. And so perhaps maybe there was something that was on me that perhaps this predator saw and that he took advantage of. And so I leaned into God. And as a result of that, I believe that God gave me a strong foundation early on, whereby that different men of God, true men of God, came into my life and began to help cultivate the gift within me. Mm-hmm. And so one of those people was Pastor John F. Hanna. What I should have turned away in the natural from the church, but I leaned further into the church and started working with young people.
On my best days, I'm a good friend, I'm a good lover, I'm a darn good creative, and I give some pretty good advice. But on my worst days, I need that advice. I need that encouragement. I need to look at my creations and have them remind me of something good inside of me. I need to be seen. I need forgiveness. Whether on my best or worst day,
Stop looking at me.
I know one thing. I'm just a vessel. And in this life, I need all the created grace that God bestows upon those who follow and love Him for the days ahead and behind me.
Go all the way through being sexually violated, seeing my cousin dead, go through the healing process of that. And then I finally opened up about my sexual violation in this year of 2003, right? Okay. I opened up about it, and I don't just open up about it in a small way. I hold an entire news special story
Oh,
conversation.
so this is how you got in the news.
This is how I got in the news, right?
Okay.
And so the person who had done this to me, I learned had done it to a lot of other kids. And so I felt God challenge me and say, if you say that you're called to young people but are not willing to be on the front line and be the sacrificial lamb, then you might as well just sit down. And so I stood up and spoke out about my story. And when I spoke out about my story, it was like a wildfire. It was on because I was the first Black dude to ever go public about, what had happened to me in a Black church.
And that's a topic already.
It's already a topic, right?
Yeah.
And so every newspaper, every radio station, every TV program was talking about it. Now, Terrance, who lives in the hood at this time, go and get my haircut in the hood. So everywhere I went to get a haircut, whatever, they were talking about it. I was so embarrassed. Like I didn't know if I wanted to tuck away or what I wanted to do. I'll never forget. My mom goes out and she buys me. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there's these. At one point back in the 2000s, early 2000s, there were these paintings of Jesus, an image of Jesus carrying a man who's kind of like laid back. So my mom went out and bought me this image and just reminded me that, like, son, the Lord is carrying you through this. You can't give up. And so I pushed through it, and I then began to fight. So I went after the person who had sexually violated me. And to God be the Lord, to this day, he's in prison now. But unfortunately, he had hurt a number of other kids. Well, so that was in February, right? In March or May, I was carjacked and kidnapped in the same area. So on the 55th and the Dan Ryan, the gas station that was there, and taken to the block where several years ago, like a decade ago, where I was sexually violated. Oh, wow. Which was the most bizarre, crazy thing. Like, I literally thought my life was going to be taken. And this is why I know that God is a keeper and he is a protector, and he will, no matter what it is, like, you think, like, after going through all those things, now by this time of being carjacked and having this whole gun experience, I had already been robbed at gunpoint 2 times before that, right? And so these guys got me. I'm down on my knees with the gun in my mouth, the first gun, tears coming down my face, and only thing I can say is Isaiah 54:17, that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Like, I couldn't say it with my mouth, but in my head, that's what I was saying. And I think the biggest mistake these guys had made, and the devil made, is that God had already proven himself when I was sexually violated. He had already proven himself when my cousin committed suicide. He had already proven himself when I had been robbed at gunpoint 2 times, that he was my protector, right? And so down on my knees, it's still the human side of me, though, was thinking, because the thing about this is that I was already a believer. So I knew that I had a place in heaven. But the only person I can think about at that moment was my mother. And it's something to be said about a mother and her son, and her only son. Like, my mama gave birth to me when she was almost 30 years old. And so she always wanted a son. And here was my life about to be taken by the very group of people that I felt called to. And this goes back to people who are called to ministry and you experience church hurt. Well, you've been called to a group of people, and it's not ironic that you are going to feel hurt by that, because you feel like, oh, they're supposed to love me, they're supposed to look after me, all that. But yet and still, here I was, and tears coming down my face. And so they got the first gun in my mouth, trying to pull the trigger, but nothing happened. The biggest mistake they made, and then they put me in the position on my knees. Well, that's my posture of worship. Like, you're going to always find me on the altar, on my knees, worshiping. And so with the tears coming down my face, they tried to pull the trigger on the first gun. Couldn't do anything with that gun when I don't know if it got jammed. It must have got jammed or something, because the trigger wouldn't be pulled, right? So they grabbed the second gun as if it would make a difference. Same thing, nothing happened. And so they got so angry, they pulled the gun out my mouth and just beat my face in with the gun.
So the gun jammed twice?
Twice.
And they put it in your mouth both times?
Both times. but nothing happened,
Wow.
right? So they pulled the gun out my mouth and then beat me in the face with the gun 3 times is what I remember. From that incident, I suffered 2 blood clots in my brain. My entire face was fractured. My mouth was completely torn up, right?
From the place that you were...
The place where I was,
held hostage.
Yes, right. So sorry. So they had me in the back of an abandoned house, down on my knees. Finally, when I passed out, I finally woke up. Now, I don't know how long I was out, but I came down the side of these 2 houses and I went from door to door looking for help, but nobody would come out to help me, right? I looked down at the end of the block. There were 2 guys that were standing there, right? One I called the able-bodied brother, which for me reminds me of some of the church today or some of the people who know to do right, but then they just look and they keep going, right? And this is why I have this thing around. When I see something on the floor, something wrong, I can't leave it alone. I got to do something about it. And so then that was the other guy that was there. He was definitely a drug user. He would have been an outcast in his family. He would be what we would call back in the days a hype, right? He just happened to live in the corner house on that particular block, right? He goes in, he has me sit on his porch. God sobered him up in that moment and he became my angel. He went in the house, got the cordless phone, but as I'm sitting on the porch, the person that got in the front seat of my truck came back around the second time. He was not in the truck. He was on his feet. He got right in front of me. And the moment he got in front of me, the guy called his name and he put his head down and he began to run, right?
This is the guy who was originally...
This was the first, yeah. This is the, yeah.
So he showed up at the addict's house.
Yeah. But he knew, so he lived on that block. I had no idea. So they took me where they lived.
Oh, that was no.
Right. And then he called him by name. He put his head down, he started running. That was the only way I was able to identify him. So the police and ambulance came, right? The ambulance left me, they racial profiled me, and the cops tried to leave me. This is like, literally, they profiled me. The ambulance left, police is there, and I'm like, I gotta get to I lived close, where I was close to where my aunt lives. They get me to my aunt's house, and they said, don't get any blood on our car, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't you go with the ambulance? And I was like, well, they wouldn't take me. They left me.
Wait, what did they say?
Who, the ambulance?
Yeah.
Oh, you'll be fine. This is exact words that said, your pretty face will be fine. And they just left me sitting there. And then they took off. Face all beat up. They said I needed brain surgery, plastic surgery, all these different surgeries, right? My Pastor Hannah was my mentor then, and my other brother, Robert Jones, and my mom, all of them came to the hospital. At the same time that I'm at the hospital, there are families coming to identify the bodies of their loved ones who had been killed the night before by violence, right? And they prayed for me a second time because they wanted to do this brain surgery and all this kind of stuff. They prayed for me a second time and say, now go back and can you guys do another scan? When they sent me back the second time, the blood clots had cleared, so I didn't need to have this brain surgery. And so I had to have 3 oral surgeries because I was determined to smile again, and I was so young, I didn't want dentures and all that in my mouth. And so when I smile, it costs me something. Every time I smile and I look at a photo or look in the mirror, I'm smiling, it costs me something. And I said to God as I was laying on the couch, I'll never forget, and I said, God, why did you allow this to happen? I was living the lifestyle. Right. And for all those believers who would listen to this and you feel like, man, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything I know to do. I'm living a life that's pleasing to God. And you feel like you're suffering. Well, the Bible says, blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake. I'm laying on the couch and I'm saying, God, why? Why? Right. And God says, it's going to be for my glory. So in a sense, you just got to hold out and not give up and say, oh man, forget God. I'm not doing this, man. I'm going to do me. I'm going to do me. But I didn't. I said, okay, God. So I kept leaning into God. And I said to him, if you bring me through this, I will live my life declaring your glory to the next generation. And whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it. And so when I finally got past all that, got a house in the south suburbs, and then the Lord says, go to New Zealand. And I'm like, what? New Zealand? I don't even know how to swim, right? And this is a little bit, it appears to be a little bit island with all this water around. At that time, I didn't know how to swim, right? But I learned as a result, kind of, island, right?
Totally not a stereotype.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And so I get there, and that's when God begins to speak to me about what he's, what he wanted me to do, and why everything that I went through was for this moment. And so I created houses.
And that's when you started.
That's when I started End Zone Project. Yeah, it's just been nonstop, and now being back here in the U.S. During the time where the heightened racial tension everywhere, and violence and crime and so forth, and so being able to provide an environment for young Black and brown kids, being a surrogate father, and now my wife and I being a surrogate family for these young people, is a lifelong journey or calling. Yeah.
Man, that was a story. Well, out of all of that story, and thanks for your transparency, what is the number one thing that you walk away with about God's character in your life?
The number one thing that I walk away with God's character in my life would be that He's consistent. He's consistent with protecting us and providing for us. He's consistent with giving us victories. He's consistent with healing us and restoring us. He's a consistent God, and he always proves himself. He always proves himself.
As I listened to Terrance's testimony and his story, which is wild, by the way, the thing that I take the most from it is how dedicated he was to practicing the presence of God, even in the midst of trouble. I recently read a book, Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, last year, and much of the book he spoke about focusing on how God was present with him in everywhere that he went in life, and not ceasing in prayer, not being distracted so much by the things in front of us. And not only can we be distracted by the things in front of us that aren't troublesome, but when trouble comes, we get completely distracted and blindsided by it. Many times trouble takes us from the presence of God, or it takes us from setting the Lord before us and not being shaken. Like the wind comes and blows us from here and there because we don't have roots in who God is when trouble comes our way. And in Terrance's story, I think we see the spine of what the saints of old were built with. We have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they were being troubled by King Nebuchadnezzar. He was going to throw them in a furnace, literally. They said, we know our God is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, just know that we're still not going to serve your gods. And then there's, in Psalms, we have David speaking about, I've set the Lord before me. He is my delight, and because of that, I will not be shaken, right? And then and Terrance talks about practicing the presence of God when he was a boy, and soon after all of the trauma and suicide happened in his life through his cousin, he learned that his place in God was on his knees, and it's that place that his enemies placed him in. Because they wanted to kill him. They placed him in that position because they thought that it made him vulnerable, but on the inside, it only reflected that he was a son. Like when he was on his knees, he was reminded of his sonship, not his victimhood in that moment. Even though he had many examples to probably reflect on being a victim in that moment, but he didn't. Instead, he chose what was most familiar. And I think that all comes back to how much faith we put into God's presence, how much faith we put into who God says that he is, and how much faith we put into who God says that we are. Because just as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, like, even if he doesn't save us, we will not be shaken. We will not move. We will still not serve. And I pray that we develop the muscle, if we don't already have it, because the times ahead of us will only get darker. And so I think our prayer closets should get stronger. Are we training ourselves in such a way that we don't really have a muscle to use when trouble hits the fan? Or are we training ourselves in such a way that whether trouble hits the fan or not, I'm still going to be setting the Lord before me, delighting in who he is and who I am to him? So I'll see y'all in episode 3. Stay at his feet. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below. And then secondly, go to abbaandme.com. Check out our fashion line and all of our products that encourage intimacy with God and the well-being of his people.